Hey everyone, DaAcorn here, and welcome back to my channel. After a couple of months of being gone, I'm finally back to making videos on the regular. I certainly did not expect my first video back, however, to be about the announcement of a new Pokémon Legends game set in the Kalos region. So let's jump right in and talk about it. The Pokémon Company celebrated Pokémon Day 2024 this past Tuesday with a live stream presenting all the new content coming to their existing games. Updates to Cafe Remix, Unite, Go, and Sleep, though most fans were anxiously awaiting the announcement of a new mainline title. Rumours and theories about what could be coming next have been floating around the internet more than ever following the release of the last chapter of DLC for Scarlet and Violet. As it's obviously too soon to see Generation 10, the predictions focused on revisiting an older region, namely Johto or Unova. A Let's Go game set in the Gold and Silver region could have made sense, or even an Ilka-developed one-to-one remake of the Black and White titles. But I, as many others, were hoping for a new installment in the Pokémon Legends franchise, set in either the Generation 2 or 5 regions. But as we were shown time and time again, Pokémon loves to establish patterns just as quickly as they demolish them. When it came time to announce their new title, it was revealed to be a Legends game set in Lumiose City, the Kalos region. I doubt very many people had Generation 6 on their bingo card, but I will say that now that Pokémon has decided that the order of games means very little, at least for Legends, Pokémon discussion has never been so unpredictable. The only thing that could stir the pot anymore is if they announce Generation 11 next. From a certain perspective, however, this announcement does make a lot of sense. I always felt that Legends Arceus was trying to make up for the lack of Arceus lore in Generation 4. The Cut Azura Flute event in the Diamond and Pearl games was always a point of interest for Pokemon players, so making the flute one of the key items that you use by far the most in Legends Arceus felt pretty cathartic for most, not to mention the re-edition of the event into the BDSP games. Though a similar story could be spun regarding Generation 5, Pokemon Grey doesn't seem like something that ever actually existed, and if it did, more than likely became the sequel games. And while I do hope to see the True Dragon in a future game, Game Freak finally being able to release a game with Pokemon Z in the title has a lot more roots in real history with the company. It has been suggested that Pokemon Z did exist at one point in time, but was sadly abandoned to keep pace and release the Gen 3 remakes instead, resulting in all of Zygarde's ideas being shifted to Gen 7. But now that we're here, let's discuss some of the things that could be in this game, starting with the starters. Deciding who the starters will be is an interesting puzzle. Had the game been set in Unova, I would have been pretty confident in predicting Trico, Fennekin, and Sobble. Avoiding Gen 1, the target gen, and the generation that previous Legend starters gave us would give us this answer, but we're not dealing with Gen 5. I've seen a prediction thrown around that we might get Snivy, Piplup, and Torchic, and while the first two do seem like good targets, there is an extra wrinkle that makes it difficult to predict these starters: the reintroduction of Mega Evolution. Both the Generation 1 and 3 starters each have a Mega Evolution, Charizard of course having 2. And while there's already a conversation about the possibility of Mega Charizard Z, I wanted to focus on how this changes for the starters. My brother and I have talked about the different combinations and how our personal pick for the 3 would be Chimchar, Snivy, and Sobble. Each could potentially get their own Mega Evolution / regional form without overlap with any pre-existing forms. But after giving it some thought, I've honestly come to believe that the starters could be the Gen 6 starters. Now hear me out. In Pokemon X and Y, none of the new Kalos Pokemon got Mega Evolutions. I suppose they thought that it would mess with the identity of those Pokemon if they were introduced with extra forms. The only Gen 6 Pokemon to get a Mega form was Diancie, and I think it's time the Kalos starters got their shot. I think a lot of people would agree that it's likely that Greninja, Chestnut, and Delphox will get their Mega Evolutions regardless of whether they are the starters. But something about it does feel kinda right. Either that or they become the gift Pokemon that the Kanto trio was in the original X and Y, and the more popular choice of Snivy, Piplup, and Scorbunny could be the starters. On the topic of Mega Evolution, we can assume that we will see new Mega Evolutions introduced, but how many of the pre-existing ones will make the cut? If they attempt to add every Mega, the entire Legend ZA Dex could probably be predicted by now, not even mentioning the possible regional forms we could get, if the Pokemon Company still likes making those. I think it could be fun to make a video trying to predict the entire Pokédex of this game before any additional information comes out about it. Let me know if you'd like to see something like that down in the comments. In terms of new Megas I'd like to see, as long as they avoid Generation 1 as much as possible, I think I'd be happy. Maybe it's too much to ask that the rest of the pseudo-legendaries get their Megas, especially since there's 3 generations of Pokemon that have released since the introduction of Mega Evolution. One aspect that was strangely missing from Legends Arceus was the ability to battle players both wirelessly and online. The satchel system was cute, but I think being able to run around the overworld and battle with your friends wherever you please is something that could definitely set ZA apart from its predecessor. Legends Arceus clearly had its eggs more in the catching basket than the battling basket, but I still think there was enough there that a multiplayer component would have been nice. Since Megas are back, it could be assumed that held items will make a return, and abilities would of course be a welcome re-addition as well. I just think it's about time that we have a Pokemon game where we can actively battle on the overworld with friends, rather than being forced to connect to some handful of basic arenas. Another interesting part of the announcement was the fact that the game is set to take place entirely within Lumiose City, during an urban redevelopment. It hasn't been officially confirmed whether this implies it takes place in the past or not, but since real-world France does have some equivalent parallels to this, I'm leaning towards the past. On the other hand, people are saying the visuals of the teaser give off futuristic vibes, and the small glimpse of humans we saw looked like they were wearing modern clothing. This could also make sense, but remains to be seen firsthand. Having to redevelop the city also makes me wonder whether the game will be set shortly after the war regarding AZ and his super weapon, and whether AZ himself will have a role to play. There wasn't much of him in X and Y, and it really felt like a huge chunk of his lore fell by the wayside when Z was ultimately cancelled. After his Floette spent years in the data files of almost every Pokemon game, possibly being able to finally attain it as an event could be on the cards this time around. But this other side of the undeveloped lore coin is of course the third legendary of the Kalos region, Zygarde. In Pokemon X and Y, Zygarde's lore started and stopped with the cave you find him in. His dex entries are pretty scarce for details, and despite not having watched the anime, it seems pretty clear he got a lot more focus than that. It wasn't until Sun and Moon that we were introduced to the gameplay concept of Zygarde cells. The Zygarde we knew beforehand was recontextualized as a 50% form, with a new canine-shaped 10% form, and of course a powerful, imposing 100% form. But still, the actual story focus on Zygarde remained paper thin. For years, fans would look back and wonder what if Pokemon Z had actually been released. With a return to Kalos and new Megas on the horizon, it makes me wonder whether Zygarde will go beyond 100% and unlock new Mega potential. Not to mention Xerneas and Yveltal possibly having more story focus as well. People have also been heavily theorizing about a possible fourth legendary, starting with of course the letter A. Though story predictions can be fun, it's essentially the Wild West at this point in the game's production. Team Flare could also make an appearance, either remaining the villains they are, or in some other fashion. I'm also excited to see the slew of new ancestors of established characters introduced. And that brings us to the release date, 2025, which means for the first time in a while, a mainline Pokemon game will not see a game or DLC release in a calendar year. Now, you could really split hairs and say that the Scarlet Violet epilogue released in January, and that counts, but I'd tell you to shut up. There is always a chance that Ilka's been working on something in the background and isn't quite ready to show it yet. But from my perspective, I'd naturally be more excited for the new Legends installment anyways. Though, as a Pokemon fan, I have to admit I found plenty of fun to be had in the Generation 9 games. They lacked in a ton of ways that Legends Arceus did not, and I would much prefer that they follow that thread to see where this more ambitious take on the Pokemon franchise goes. It's certainly the most fun I've had in a Pokemon game since probably Sun and Moon, and before that, Black and White. If you want to see more Pokemon related videos leading up to the release of Legends ZA, please let me know down below. And if you liked this video and want to see more, I have plenty more videos planned for 2024, so like and subscribe, and I'd like to thank you for watching DaAcorn.